It was a bright, sunny afternoon at Cedar Ridge National Park. The kind of day when sunlight sparkled on the leaves, children's laughter echoed across the trails, and hikers stopped to take pictures of the breathtaking scenery. Families strolled along the paths, couples held hands, and cameras clicked every few seconds. Everything seemed calm and ordinary. That is until an arrogant park ranger decided to show everyone who was in charge. Ranger Thompson, a tall man in his mid-30s, had a reputation among staff for being brash and overly confident. Today, he was strutting down the trail like he owned the entire park. His chest puffed out, boots stomping on the gravel, hands on his belt. He barked orders at visitors, shooing them away from areas he claimed were restricted. Everyone knew he loved to feel powerful, but no one expected what happened next. At the edge of a quieter trail, a man stood calmly observing the trees and streams. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a casual shirt, and a jacket tied around his waist. He wasn't surrounded by security, nor did he make a scene. Yet, there was something in his presence that drew attention. It was Steven Seagal. People passing by noticed his calm demeanor, the way he held himself, but most continued walking, unaware of his identity. Thompson stormed over, glaring at the man as if he had just caught a trespasser. "You're not allowed here," he shouted. "Step away from the trail before I take action." His voice was loud enough to carry across the clearing, and several tourists turned to watch. Steven remained composed. He lifted his hand slightly, not in aggression but in a gesture of peace. "I have permission to be here," he said quietly. "I am allowed on this trail." The ranger laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Permission? From who? You think you can just walk in here like everyone else?" Before anyone could react, Thompson lunged forward and kicked Steven Seagal squarely in the face. The sharp sound of impact echoed across the park. Tourists froze, some gasped, others covered their mouths. Children stopped playing, cameras swung up, and whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man who had been struck, expecting him to fall, to get angry, or to react in some dramatic way. But Steven Seagal didn't fall. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch dramatically. He simply turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto the ranger, calm but piercing. Seconds passed like hours. Then, almost silently, the realization hit Thompson. He had just attacked the wrong man. The park went utterly silent. Everyone froze, waiting to see what would happen next. It was a bright afternoon at Cedar Ridge National Park. Sunlight poured through the trees, casting a warm glow on the walking trails. Birds chirped and fluttered from branch to branch. Families strolled leisurely, parents holding the hands of toddlers, teenagers exploring the paths with backpacks, and tourists snapping pictures of the scenic views. The air smelled fresh, carrying the faint aroma of pine and wildflowers. Everywhere you looked, people were enjoying the perfect day outdoors. Laughter rang out from playground areas, dogs barked playfully, and cyclists whizzed past on the paved trails. It seemed like any ordinary day, calm, serene, and safe. Yet, amid this peaceful scene, tension was quietly building. The head park ranger, Thompson, had arrived earlier that morning and was already in full authority mode. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished, and his belt held a radio, keys, and a flashlight. He walked briskly along the main trail, his posture rigid, chest out, jaw tight. Thompson had always believed that the uniform made him untouchable, that the power it symbolized gave him a right to control every visitor, push aside every question, and assert dominance over anyone who dared to cross him. As he patrolled, he barked orders at families who strayed a few feet from the path, waved his hands angrily at tourists trying to take pictures in restricted areas, and scolded children for picking up leaves or tossing pebbles near the stream. His voice was loud and commanding, echoing across the open space, creating an atmosphere of tension. Some visitors tried to avoid him, stepping aside quickly or lowering their cameras, while others whispered to each other, shaking their heads at his overbearing behavior. Thompson thrived in this environment. He felt invincible, thinking that no one could challenge him, at least, no one should. He had a sharp tongue, a booming voice, and an ego that had grown unchecked over the years. To him, rules were not guidelines but weapons, and he wielded them like a sledgehammer. But then, just a few steps from a clearly marked restricted trail, a figure appeared who would change everything. He was calm, composed, and utterly unassuming. Jeans, a simple shirt, and a jacket tied around his waist made him look like any ordinary hiker. Yet his posture, relaxed but confident, suggested that he was someone used to being observed, someone who could command attention without even trying. This man was Steven Seagal. He stood silently near the trail, taking in the surroundings. Unlike most visitors, he did not fidget, speak loudly, or wave at cameras. His presence was quiet, yet somehow magnetic. A few casual onlookers noticed him, sensing that he was no ordinary person, but most assumed he was just another hiker enjoying the park. Then, as if drawn by instinct, Ranger Thompson zeroed in on him. "Hey, you! Step away from that trail," he barked. His voice was sharp, authoritative, and laced with irritation. "Rules are rules. You can't be here." Steven turned his head slowly, keeping his gaze calm and steady. He did not shout back. He did not flinch. "I have permission to be on this trail," he said quietly, each word measured, controlled, and deliberate. "I am allowed here." Thompson's eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened. He could not understand why this man, this quiet, ordinary-looking man, dared to contradict him. Thompson's anger spiked. In his mind, no one disobeys the head ranger without consequence. "Permission? From who? You think you can just stroll in here like everyone else?" he sneered. He took a step closer, puffing out his chest, trying to intimidate him. The tension in the air was palpable. Tourists stopped walking. Phones were raised instinctively. Children clutched their parents' hands. Even birds seemed to hesitate mid-flight. Everyone could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen. And in that charged moment, you can almost hear the unspoken challenge. One man armed with arrogance, the other armed with calm authority that no uniform could grant. Backhand index pointing right, comment where you are watching from and support calm people who stay respectful under pressure. The tension at Cedar Ridge National Park was electric. Families had paused mid-step, tourists had raised their cameras, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Ranger Thompson, eyes blazing and face red with fury, stepped closer to Steven Seagal. His chest heaved as he tried to assert dominance. He had been in control all morning, and the thought of someone defying his orders, calmly, without fear, was intolerable. Steven, meanwhile, remained still. His posture was relaxed, his expression neutral, but his eyes betrayed a quiet strength, the kind that commands attention without a single shout. "I have permission to be here," he said evenly, his voice calm and deliberate. "I am allowed on this trail. I am following the rules." Thompson's face contorted in disbelief. "Permission? From who?" he barked, his tone dripping with condescension. "People like you always say that. You think rules do not apply to you? Step aside now." He jabbed a finger in Steven's direction, a mix of anger and arrogance radiating from him. The crowd around them watched, holding their collective breath. The sunlight glinted off Thompson's badge and the metal of his belt buckle as he moved aggressively toward Steven. He was a man convinced that physical intimidation could solve any conflict, that fear would always bend others to his will. Steven did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply tilted his head slightly, meeting Thompson's glare with a calm intensity that seemed to pierce the very air. "Aggression is easy," he said softly, almost to himself. "Understanding takes patience. Judgment comes from wisdom, not force." The ranger, however, did not hear wisdom. All he saw was defiance. All he felt was the urge to assert control. Without warning, Thompson swung his leg and delivered a sharp, deliberate kick aimed at Steven's face. The impact was sudden and shocking. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. Parents pulled their children back, some shielding their eyes. Phones were dropped as tourists instinctively tried to record what was happening, or perhaps because their hands shook from shock. The sound of the kick echoed against the trees and rocks of the park, mingling with the sudden cries of alarm from the crowd. Time seemed to freeze for everyone. The peaceful afternoon had turned into a scene of chaos, tension, and disbelief. But Steven did not fall. He did not stumble, nor did he flinch dramatically. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, his body absorbing the force without a single exaggerated reaction. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head to look at Thompson. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and almost hypnotic. It was a look that seemed to say, without words, that the ranger had just made a grave mistake. Thompson froze. His eyes widened as he realized that Steven Seagal was no ordinary visitor, no trembling hiker, and certainly no person to be bullied. The calmness in Steven's eyes was terrifying. It spoke of experience, control, and a readiness to respond in ways Thompson could not even imagine. The arrogance that had filled the ranger's chest moments before now felt hollow. Around them, the crowd whispered and murmured, the previous laughter and casual chatter replaced with tense anticipation. Everyone sensed that the power dynamic had shifted in an instant. The man they had thought was ordinary, quiet, unassuming, almost invisible, now dominated the space entirely, without moving more than a single step. Steven's silence amplified the tension. Every person in the park, from the parents clutching their children to the teenagers frozen with their phones, could feel that something monumental was about to happen. The moment hung heavy in the air, suspended between aggression and retribution, arrogance and humility. And in that silence, the truth became painfully clear to Thompson. He had misjudged the man he attacked. The park fell into an almost eerie silence. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze and the distant murmur of a stream winding through the trails. Birds, startled by the sudden commotion, scattered into the sky in flapping chaos. Even the usual background noises of laughter, barking dogs, and crunching gravel seemed to fade into nothing. The entire park had paused, waiting to see what would happen next. Ranger Thompson, for a brief moment, thought he had won. A smug smile crept across his face as he straightened his uniform and puffed out his chest. He looked around at the crowd of onlookers frozen in shock, and for a second, he felt a rush of power. His mind raced with thoughts of how he had just asserted authority over someone who dared to defy the rules. He expected fear, compliance, or at least some visible sign of submission. In his mind, the confrontation was over, and he was victorious. But then the world seemed to shift. Steven Seagal slowly raised a hand to his face, brushing away a little dust and dirt from the impact. He did it without haste or dramatic flair, his movements calm, precise, almost deliberate. His body remained relaxed, unshaken, yet every eye in the crowd seemed to gravitate toward him. His eyes, sharp and focused, met Thompson's with a quiet intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the park. The calm in Steven's demeanor contrasted sharply with the ranger's tension. Thompson's earlier arrogance began to crumble. Every second he looked at Steven made him realize just how gravely he had misjudged the man he had attacked. This was no ordinary visitor. No ordinary hiker. No ordinary person to bully or intimidate. The crowd, still frozen, began to sense it too. Whispers started circulating among the onlookers. Who is that guy? I've seen him somewhere. Phones and cameras were raised again, not out of fear this time, but in awe, as tourists tried to capture a man whose presence seemed to command the entire park without a single word. Finally, Steven spoke. His voice was low, controlled, and calm, not raised, not threatening, but undeniably authoritative. You should never touch someone without knowing who they are. The words cut through the tension like a knife. The clarity, the quiet weight of authority in that single statement, made the arrogant ranger pause. It was not a threat. It was a lesson, delivered in the simplest form, yet far more powerful than any shout or display of force could ever be. The statement carried experience, wisdom, and a silent warning that Thompson could feel in his chest. Thompson's bravado faltered. His face went pale, his lips pressed tight as he tried to comprehend the situation. The arrogance that had fueled him all morning was replaced with a creeping realization. He had just humiliated himself in front of a crowd, and he had no idea who he was dealing with. Around them, the onlookers shifted, some taking cautious steps back while others whispered excitedly. Children clutched their parents' hands, unsure of what was happening but sensing the tension in the air. Even the older visitors, those who had been walking calmly moments before, now looked on with a mixture of awe and apprehension. And all the while, Steven stood calm. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a dramatic gesture. He simply exuded a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around him. The contrast between his composed demeanor and the ranger's flustered, panicked state was striking. The message was clear to everyone. Force and aggression might intimidate some people, but true strength lies in restraint, awareness, and composure. Thompson had acted impulsively, relying on the uniform and the authority it symbolized. Steven, however, relied on control, presence, and an unshakable calm. In that moment, it was no longer just a confrontation. It was a lesson witnessed by dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people, a demonstration of power, humility, and respect all at once. The park itself seemed to acknowledge it, the wind rustling the trees almost like a subtle applause, and the distant birds returning to their perches as if the tension had lifted. The entire scene left one undeniable truth hanging in the air. Sometimes the quietest people, the ones who seem least threatening, are the ones who hold the most power. And the arrogant, the impulsive, and the overconfident learn this truth the hard way. The tension in Cedar Ridge National Park had reached its peak. For several long seconds, time seemed to stand still. Ranger Thompson's chest heaved as he struggled to maintain control, his face red with embarrassment and anger. He had been confronted, humiliated, and utterly overpowered, without the other man raising a hand or shouting a single word. The crowd around them held its collective breath, uncertain of what would happen next. Suddenly, the distant sound of running footsteps echoed through the trails. Park officials and additional security personnel were rushing in, their radios crackling with urgency. Their faces were grim, their eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. Families and tourists instinctively stepped back, giving the officials room to intervene. The calm, quiet presence of Steven Seagal remained the focal point, drawing everyone's attention like a magnet. One of the senior officials, a woman in her 40s with an authoritative presence, pushed through the small crowd and shouted, her voice ringing across the park, "Stop right now! Do you even know who that is?" Thompson froze. His bravado faltered, and a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. He looked around, confused and unsteady, his earlier confidence evaporating in an instant. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had assumed that the man he had kicked was just another hiker, another ordinary visitor who might defy him but could be intimidated into submission. He had no idea of the true identity of the person standing before him. Another official stepped forward, holding a folder thick with documents and credentials. He waved them slightly in the air as he spoke, his tone both respectful and urgent. "That is Steven Seagal, federal consultant and trainer. He works with law enforcement agencies across the country and provides advanced tactical and security training. He is here today on official business." Thompson's knees shook. He struggled to stay upright, his boots feeling heavier with every second. His face drained of color, going from red with arrogance to pale with panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The arrogance that had defined him all morning had evaporated, replaced by a chilling realization. He had just attacked a man far beyond his ability to intimidate or control. The crowd murmured. Phones were raised, recording every detail. Whispers spread quickly, some visitors shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging astonished looks. "I can't believe he just kicked him," one tourist muttered. "Do you know who he is?" another asked, voice trembling with excitement. Steven Seagal remained calm, almost serene, despite the chaos surrounding him. He adjusted his jacket slightly and exhaled quietly, his eyes sweeping over the ranger and the officials. There was no rage in his expression, only the quiet authority of someone who had seen countless confrontations and knew exactly how to handle them. Thompson, meanwhile, was paralyzed by the weight of his mistake. The power he had relied on, the badge, the uniform, the perceived control over the park, meant nothing now. He felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. The reality of his actions crashed down on him, leaving him trembling in the bright afternoon sunlight. Steven finally spoke, his voice low, calm, and steady, carrying over the whispers of the crowd. "I came here to observe and support the park. I did not come to fight. But those who act recklessly must understand the consequences of their actions." The officials nodded approvingly. The message was clear: authority comes with responsibility, and recklessness has consequences. Ranger Thompson's mistake was now a lesson for everyone witnessing the scene. Backhand index pointing right, fire or forgive. Comment below and let your voice be heard. Would you punish him for his arrogance or show mercy? Join the conversation and see what others think. The crowd's energy shifted slightly as people debated quietly among themselves. Some sympathized with the ranger's embarrassment, while others believed he had crossed a line that could never be ignored. Meanwhile, Steven Seagal's calm demeanor reinforced the lesson he had already silently delivered. Strength is shown through restraint, not aggression, and respect must be earned, never assumed. The sunlight continued to shine over the park, but the mood had changed. What had started as an ordinary, peaceful afternoon had transformed into a moment that everyone present would remember for years. A lesson about power, humility, and consequences had unfolded in the middle of the trails, witnessed by dozens of people who would never forget the day an arrogant ranger met a quiet, unstoppable force. The tension at Cedar Ridge National Park had reached its peak, and for a moment, everything seemed suspended in the bright afternoon light. Ranger Thompson's face was pale, his knees weak, and his hands trembled slightly. He had never felt so exposed, so powerless, and so completely humiliated in his life. The realization of what he had done, striking Steven Seagal, a man of unquestionable authority and skill, pressed on him like a physical weight. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his voice quivering as he tried to form words. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. I shouldn't have. His apology stumbled over itself, fragmented by fear and embarrassment. Every person watching could feel the genuine desperation in his voice. For the first time that day, Thompson wasn't strutting, shouting, or pretending to control the situation. He was vulnerable, exposed, and completely at the mercy of the man he had wronged. Steven Seagal, still calm and composed, raised a hand gently, signaling him to stop. He did not shout, he did not move aggressively, and he did not show any sign of rage. His presence alone was enough to command attention, to quiet the murmurs of the crowd, and to set the tone for what would happen next. The silence that fell was heavy, filled with anticipation, as everyone watched the interaction between the two men. "This is not about me," Steven said slowly, his voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of authority and wisdom. "This is about abusing power. Your role as a ranger comes with responsibility. It is a role that requires respect for others, not the assertion of dominance through force or intimidation. When you forget that, the consequences fall on you, and today you have seen what happens when arrogance goes unchecked." His words were deliberate, calm, and firm. They were not just a reprimand, but a lesson, one that every person present would carry with them. The ranger's shoulders slumped as the truth of Steven's statement sank in. He had been given a chance to assert authority, but he had done so foolishly and recklessly. Now, the situation demanded accountability. Park officials, already on high alert, moved in to enforce the necessary actions. Two senior security personnel approached Thompson, gently but firmly guiding him away from the crowd. There was no violence in their movements, no harsh words, only the quiet authority of a system responding to a clear breach of conduct. The rangers' protests were weak, faltering, and quickly silenced by the weight of the situation. Witnesses to the incident watched closely. Families, tourists, and staff all nodded in quiet approval at the way the situation was being handled. It was a moment that emphasized that true authority is not about who can strike first, shout louder, or intimidate others. True authority comes from discipline, fairness, and respect, and it is enforced without arrogance or personal vendettas. Steven Seagal remained standing on the trail, his calm demeanor unchanged. He surveyed the park around him, noticing the subtle shifts in the crowd. Some visitors whispered to each other, recounting the incident in disbelief. Children clutched their parents' hands, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Tourists lowered their cameras slowly, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Even though Thompson was being escorted away, the lesson had already been delivered. The park had returned to its usual activity, but the impact of the moment lingered in the air like the afterglow of a storm. Everyone present understood that power misused comes with consequences, and that respect, once lost, cannot be reclaimed through force alone. Steven finally took a slow step forward, moving toward a quieter trail. His presence remained commanding, yet serene. Without saying another word, he left the crowd with an enduring message. Humility, awareness, and restraint are the true measures of strength. The sun continued to shine over Cedar Ridge, highlighting the leaves, trails, and faces of those who had witnessed the lesson. And though the day returned to normal in its external appearance, everyone who had seen the encounter knew they would carry the memory, and the lesson, for years to come. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees of Cedar Ridge National Park, the crowd slowly began to disperse, yet the energy of what had just occurred lingered in the air like a tangible force. Birds resumed their songs, leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and the laughter of children cautiously returned to the trails. On the surface, the park appeared calm, ordinary, and peaceful, but for those who had witnessed the confrontation, everything had changed. The events of the day left an undeniable lesson in their wake. Ranger Thompson, once brimming with arrogance and certainty, had been humbled in an instant. He had learned firsthand that authority alone does not command respect. That respect is not something a uniform grants, nor is it something that can be forced through intimidation or violence. True respect is earned through integrity, discipline, and restraint, and it is tested in moments when the world is watching. Steven Seagal's presence had been quiet yet powerful, commanding attention not through aggression, but through control. He had demonstrated that strength is not measured by one's ability to strike first or dominate physically, but by the ability to remain calm, composed, and deliberate in the face of provocation. The single measured statement he had delivered, "You should never touch someone without knowing who they are," had carried more weight than any argument, threat, or show of force could. It had resonated not only with the arrogant ranger, but also with every person who had witnessed the encounter. For the crowd, the lesson extended beyond the confrontation itself. Parents whispered to their children about the importance of treating others with dignity. Teenagers and tourists discussed quietly among themselves, reflecting on the difference between power and authority, between intimidation and respect. Even the park staff who had observed the incident nodded in understanding, recognizing that the park's rules were not just about order, but about how humans should interact with one another. Cedar Ridge National Park, in its ordinary beauty, had become a stage for a lesson in humility. The bright sunlight, which had earlier highlighted the ranger's arrogance and the sudden tension, now illuminated the broader truth, that actions driven by arrogance can lead to instant consequences, while actions rooted in respect and self-control leave a lasting impression. Everyone present, from the youngest child to the oldest tourist, could feel the weight of that lesson lingering in the air. Power, Steven had shown, is not demonstrated by violence or the ability to intimidate. It is demonstrated by the strength to control oneself, to assess situations wisely, and to act with both purpose and restraint. Those who rush to assert dominance through force often discover, far too late, that they have misjudged the situation. Those who maintain calm and exercise control leave a lesson that echoes far beyond the moment. And so, as the park slowly returned to normal, a quiet reverence remained. The confrontation had ended, the ranger had been removed, and the crowd resumed their activities. But the memory of the day, the image of a quiet, calm man standing firmly in the face of aggression, would remain with everyone who had been there. The lesson was clear: humility is not weakness, respect is not optional, and true strength is often silent. Now, it is your turn to reflect. Respect matters even in daylight, especially when everyone is watching. It matters when no one is paying attention. It matters in every interaction, every decision, every moment of choice. Power is not measured by who can strike first, shout loudest, or push others aside. Power is measured by self-control, patience, and the ability to act wisely under pressure. Those who embrace this truth understand the real meaning of strength, and leave a legacy that outlasts any moment of arrogance or force. Backhand index pointing right. Type respect if you believe humility is real strength and tell me your country. Share your thoughts below and join the conversation about what it truly means to act with integrity and control. Let the world know that respect is not given lightly, and that strength lies in restraint. The sun continued to shine over Cedar Ridge, highlighting the trails, the trees, and the faces of those who had learned an unforgettable lesson. And though the day seemed ordinary on the surface, the impact of what had transpired, the lesson of respect, humility, and controlled power, would resonate in the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed it for years to come.